Okay, we're going to be working with STL importer today. Go to import STL file and scroll down to my Voyager model. Open that up. Okay, should be opening. Alright, model comes up here. You can see, rotate it around, look at it. It's got lots of detail to it that's going to be nice when carving out. We can reproduce as much as we can. Get a good model to work with. Alright, when you're inspecting it here, you can look for errors in the STL. And any of these little pink areas that you're seeing are problems with the STL, which can cause you problems, and in most cases are going to make a model invalid for slicing and carving. After playing with this model for a while, I've found ways to work around that on this one. We'll have to do a little bit of cleanup in our pattern editor, but we'll get this one actually ready to carve. You notice when I'm rotating, this little box here is rotating with it. It's telling you what axis you're on from the different views that you're looking at. You can snap to any of those by just double clicking on that plane so you can see exactly where you're at. You can determine which axis you're on if you have scaling that you want to do on certain axes, not maintaining aspect ratio. Do lots of different orientations that way. Now these buttons here actually change your orientation, so I can rotate where I'm at and set my axis. So if I want Z to be this view or whatever view I rotate to, I can go ahead and set that right here in this window. Alright, this imports in millimeters, and I want to work in inches, so I'm going to select inches. And we're going to set the scale of this to be something more appropriate for carving at. Let's go ahead and set the width to be about 13 inches. And that will fit within the machine without having to do too many slices, too many parts on this. And it makes about 33 inches long, which will be a nice big size model for display. Alright, we'll hit the next button. Okay, so it shows up here, oriented with my planes showing exactly how I had rotated it and set it to look in my last viewer. So I'm going to look at this and determine, well, what's going to be the best way to carve this. Now for the most part, this thing is just up and down, so from the top view here I can carve straight down and get all of that detail easily, and then from the bottom I'm dealing with pretty much the same thing. So this should be pretty straightforward to slice together. Now things you want to look for and that you've got to get more tricky with are undercuts, which we've got some here that we're going to have to look at underneath the saucer section here. We will address that when we get to it, but let's go ahead and rotate this around, and we'll just start where it's obvious. Start from the top. We can rotate this to the top. Now it's set at a default slice of 3/4 inch because most materials used in our machine are 3/4 inch. I'm happen to using 1 inch extruded polystyrene to build this model with. It's just the pink insulation foam that you find at most hardware stores. So I'm going to set this to 1 inch because that's the thickness of my material. So set my slices there, and I'm just going to start cutting down this model. Cut the top off and slice down to where it gets to an appropriate level here. Now, let's get this so we can see it. And you'll see here this kind of lip that goes around. You want a little bit on the bottom and a little bit on the top so they can join together a little bit easier there. So this actually slices perfect, and we'll cut it right there, and we pretty much have our top off and ready to go. Now on the inside of the model here, you can see is pink, and So that's relatively successful. That works well for us. So we've got 3 different slices now. Now, part of the problem that you encounter when you deal with those kind of inside out pieces, those little pink errors that we were looking at before, is that a lot of times you will not get the auto heal, the ability for the blank areas in between the model to automatically fill in, which our software does do if you've got a correct model. Now, I can correct things like this simply enough in our pattern editor, which we'll get to a little bit later. So let's look at back to our original model, and let's flip this whole thing around. Now, green is always the slice plane. This is always the view I want to be looking at when I'm slicing. If you're looking on the red side of the plane, then you're looking on the wrong end. That's the back side of the plane. So let's flip this around, this model around, so now we're looking at the bottom of it and with our slice plane there. Now we've got another obvious cut that's going to be easily carved. So let's cut that. And let's look at this. Now we've got 2 sides to these, so we can back off this 1 inch, kind of go right into the middle of these nacelles here, so that we got a good top and bottom cut on those. And let's cut that. And that also gets us to about the halfway point on this round area here, which is all going to need to be cut and shaped from the top. But we've got the scenario here where we've got this bottom part of the saucer that's going to need to be carved from the other direction. So how do we cut that off and make this a viable slice? Well, first of all, let's see if we can't lower this slice down to where we can slice it off right at the base of this. We'll need to select bisect so that we have enough room to move down. So we'll move our slice all the way to that base edge, and let's hit cut. Alright. So what's that's done is removed the majority of this section, but it didn't remove it all. There's a lot of little raised detail areas there that we're going to have to address. So let's go about cutting those off. Maybe we should take off just this whole front section first. So let's set this to 90 degrees and rotate it to the front. And we probably set this to 0. And then just move this in to where it's cutting off most of that front area right there. We can zoom in and move this, and we can use our little arrow buttons to shift things around, and we'll cut that. Okay, so we've got this whole section, which is not a carvable area. All these little details, you can't carve those and expect to regain them. We've got this section here which we lost all the detail on, so let's take this slice, drag it, and reattach it to that section above, and it heals it and glues it right back on. Okay, so let's go back down to the working model that we're working with, and we've got the rest of these details which we can do the same with. Set this back to 0 and set this back to bisect and move this in here. Okay, this makes this much easier. We can set this angle here to kind of come in underneath that undercut and slice this stuff off. And zoom in here. Looks like we're getting a little bit of that missing. So we'll just keep rotating until we've got the right angles going here to get that whole piece. Okay, it looks like that angle is working pretty good. I'm at -26 and at 4 here, and it's going to get all that stuff. I was going to slice this off, but that's okay. Let's cut it. Okay, we've got those details now. So let's set this back to 0. Let's set this back to 90 and bisect that, and we'll just cut all those things and separate them from this. So now I've got this slice. We can open up here our window a little bit more, which I can drag back up to this one and reattach those details to this carve here. And I've got this, which I want to reattach back to this model. So we're able to separate things out and reattach them and really create exactly the carved areas that we're wanting to create with very little effort here, just by healing models back together. Okay, we need to do the same thing on the other side, which we can go and set this to +26, set this to -4, and bisect. We should be able to slice this off the same way we did the last one. So I'm getting a little bit of a corner there. Okay. That should slice it off. Cut that. Gives me that model, and then back to this slice, which I'll go and set this one at 90 degrees again. Go to bisect and just cut it in the middle again. Now we've got these separate sections again. So we'll drag this back up to this model, and we've regained all those details that we lost when we originally cut that off. And then we can go back to this model and take this section that we sliced off of it and add it back to that. Alright, so now we're pretty much almost done. We've got the model sliced up exactly how we need to produce a carvable regions. Now we've got this right here, which is a little bit of a problem, and it's going to be an undercut on this carve right here. So we're going to have to slice that off. So let's take our slice plane, put it back to 90 degrees, and we'll zoom in here. So right now that's got an angle to it. Let's straighten that out and move that in an inch. And that gives us a little bit of a problem in that we're not going to be able to get the whole thing in one slice. But what we can do is move this forward, cut off the front section, and let's add a 7-degree angle to it. From this direction, that angle is going to be carvable, and what I'm going to do is that the undercut really doesn't exist here on the front part. Looks like it could all be carved from above. So I'm going to cut that off. I'm going to take that small little section and I'm going to glue it back up to the underside of that saucer. Let's rotate that around so we can see it. So now I can put that on that saucer and just have it carve out there, and it gives me a little angle there with which I can easily mesh things up against, instead of creating a straight up and down, which we know our bit is not designed to do, and shaping things. We'll be able to glue things right up to that. Okay, that produces the rest of this that we'll need to slice off. Once again, that angle is to be considered, and just about there with the 1 inch. So maybe we needed to take off a little bit more that first time around. So we'll undo that, and let's move this in just a hair more. Last time we sliced it off there, we'll use our arrow button, go the next step in. We'll cut that. And go our full inch. And we'll cut this. So we can glue that little section back up to the underside of the saucer. Which has enough depth to it that we can add that to it. And got this remaining section here, which we need to flip around so it's facing the right way. And that little bit of 7-degree taper is going to work well for us on this side too. With that straight up and down edge, with that little bit of taper there, we'll be able to glue that back up to that other section without too much trouble. So we'll rotate our plane up to the top, and we'll go look at this slice. It looks like it's going to give me a little bit, just under an inch. I'm not going to have enough area to cut this all off as one slice. Just barely there, and I may be able to fudge it in the end and fill it, but since I can back off this slice, I go ahead and just separate this into 2 slices. I can cut off this area here, and then I've got 2 sizable sections to work with. Now, I probably don't want to try to glue those things up the way that it's cut right now, which easily enough we can go ahead and rotate our planes and bisect, slide that out to cut that section off, and then reattach that back up to the models there. Now we can look here to make sure that it's not topping us off with that inch slicer, and it's giving us plenty of space. We're not going to lose any detail there, so we'll do that to the next one. Select bisect again, cut that off, and reattach that back to my thing. So now I can cut that, turn it into a slice as well, and I'm good to go. Now every slice you create, when you select on it, should have the green behind it with the side you want to carve facing out. When you select it, if it does not have that, then you need to be able to reorient it. So set your rotation back to 0 and rotate your model to where it's facing the right orientation. So when you make a slice, it should default to that view. If it doesn't, go ahead and just orient it so it does. So basically what that's doing is setting your Z so it knows I'm going to carve down onto this. Otherwise, if you've got it as a side profile, it'll take this whole thing and it'll just try to carve the profile of it. So I've got all my slices now, and there's not too many of them. We're under 20. We'll find out here when we go to the next section. Okay, let's hit next. Okay, here you're allowed to view all of your sections, and if you have blank sections, you just deselect them and look at all of your slices. Make sure that they're oriented properly for you to be able to carve them. You can do some flipping and orienting here if you want to, but not necessary as long as you've got everything set properly within the last screen. It'll create a category within your pattern library, so name it whatever you want. This went ahead and named it after my thing, after my model, and I'll hit finish and it will load the patterns into my library.